So the left is really insistent, for the party of science that thinks you can drop rocks from the moon and they will actually destroy the earth, that party of science also doesn't seem to understand that men are men and women are women, and they can't magically change sex. So Ben Ferguson, who's a talk show host in the middle of the country, he was on CNN with Chris Cuomo, and he was talking about this case in Texas that we talked about earlier in the week, in which this girl who is on steroids, I mean, she's on testosterone, she wrestled a bunch of other girls in the Texas high school wrestling championships, and she won. Because it turns out that girls on steroids are able to outcompete other girls. And this has been a problem ever since the East Germans used to drug up their women for swimming, and then they'd win all the medals, and then it would come out later that they were all drugged up. This has been a problem for a long time. Chris Cuomo, however, on CNN, who is thick as a block of wood, cannot understand why anyone would have objections to any of this.
The irony is that if there were acceptance, we wouldn't have had this issue because this kid would be wrestling against boys. But just so we know, and for those as you're learning about this issue.
But even then, though,
let me just so people know.
Here's the thing.
Well, hold on, Ben.
Sure.
Let's just clarify one thing. The science you have to be very careful about, okay?
But to say that we should change the entire way that sports is done because of one person and their decision to do something, that is unrealistic.
But the premise is flawed because the logic requires you to believe that of course you do. That's why we're having the discussion. That transgender doesn't count. But it does count, and that's why we're having this bigger debate about what you allow transgender kids to have access to and what you don't.
That if you are born a boy, that you use the boys' restroom / locker room.
But what if you identify
as
a girl?
You go in.
But you're simplifying the idea of gender and sex. Look, we've heard this. This is not a novel concept. We have the Fourth Circuit. The Fourth Circuit just said what I'm saying.
Okay, and the Fourth Circuit is wrong because this is silly. Okay, the fact is this. If you're going to separate gender from sex, and you're just going to say that what gender is however you feel in your head, then there aren't two genders, right? There's no transgenders. There's not two genders. There's not 50 genders, as Facebook would have you believe. There are infinite numbers of genders, right? Because I am Ben-gendered, right? In my head, my gender is exactly what I say it is. And in your head, you have the number of genders that you say you have. The fact is that if you want to make gender so specific that it's just what's going on in your mind, then why box it into a various series of categories? Why not instead just say that you are, Bob-gendered or military or Millie-gendered, right? You have your own gender. The problem is once you separate off biology and gender, then you end up in this la-la land where basically we just say, okay, fine, we'll treat you as individuals with regard to your quote-unquote gender, but your sex is still the governing body. And that's the problem the left can't deal with. So instead what they try to do is they try to create this tenuous linkage between sex and gender, even though gender is basically a made-up term. Sex is sex, end of story. They've tried to basically say that you can have a female brain in a male body. There's no evidence of that. The scientific studies that try and make claims about neurological density between transgender men and transgender women being similar to the sex they claim membership to, those studies are very, very small in sample size. They typically survey like 7 or 8 people who are transgender. They're self-selected, so you don't actually have a good basis for comparison. Really what you'd want to do is sample 1,000 women and then see if all the women who had the most neurological density in certain parts of their brain, were all those women transgender? If the answer is yes, then maybe you have something. If the answer is no, then there's no correlation even. So these studies are really poorly done. They don't hold up under scrutiny. The fact is this, we just don't know that much about how the human brain works. And I would assume that if you are transgender and if you have some sort of mental disorder, that there is a biological basis for the mental disorder. Nobody's claiming that it's you're faking it or that you're choosing to be this thing. But that doesn't change the fact that your sex is your sex, and your sex is chromosomally determined. It is biologically determined. Chris Cuomo pretending he doesn't understand that. Maybe he doesn't understand it. Maybe he's just that dumb.